Hi everyone, welcome to our Lord's Day Holy Reading. It's Lord's Day. Nice to have you here and ready to get going, continuing on with Thomas Manton on self-denial. And here is Mr. Peck to continue on.
All right, welcome everybody. We're in week 2 of Thomas Manton's Treatise of Self-Denial, which the whole treatise is based on the scripture reference Matthew 16:24. If any man will come after me, let him deny himself. Last week I did the first 2.5 pages or so, which brought us to the doctrine, which I will read the introduction here and then explain a little bit of what we'll cover today, Lord willing. Doctrine, that it is the duty of all that would be Christ's disciples to deny themselves. He says, I shall handle the doctrine of self-denial, number 1, in general, and number 2, in its several kinds and subjective parts. So, first, in general, in managing this argument, I shall use this method vis-a-vis 4 points. I'll read them all, although just doing half of number 1 today. 1, give the extent of self-denial. 2, the reasons of this duty with the most effectual motives and arguments of persuasion. 3, the signs by which we may know whether we are omitting it or practicing it. And 4, the helps which the Scripture prescribes for our furtherance in so great a work. So today, first, as a foundation for all the rest, he says, I shall consider the extent of this duty, both in regard of the object, or the things which are to be denied, and in regard of the subject, or the persons who are to practice it. Today, Lord willing, we'll just do the first part that he says, I shall consider the extent of this duty regarding the object. And when we get to the end of what I'm going to this subpart number 1, I will be doing a reading from Hoartius Bonar, and it's very convicting, but comforting also, which we'll go into, Lord willing. For the object, number 1, a man's own self. It is a bundle of idols. I like that opening. A man's own self, it is a bundle of idols. So it needs self-denial. Since God was laid aside, self succeeded in the crown. We set up everything that we call our own, everything before which we may put that possessive ours may be abused and set up as a snare. So anything in our lives can end up being a snare, depending on how we handle it. All the excellences and comforts of human life, both inward and outward. For the understanding of this, and that you may know how far self is to be denied, I must premise some general considerations, and then instance in some particulars. For it seemeth harsh and contrary to reason that a man should deny himself to the natural man, since nature teacheth a man to love himself and cherish himself. Effusion 5, verse 29, no man ever hated his own flesh, unquote, and grace doth not disallow it. Therefore, subpoint 1, in general you must know when respects to self are culpable. In other words, when you've gone too far in allowing something to become an idol, or taking over your life instead of focusing on the Lord. There is a lawful self-love, quote, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, James 2 verse 8, in which there is not only a direction to love our neighbor, but a concession and an allowance, it's implied, to love ourselves, and in so doing we do well. By an innocent and natural respect, nature fortifies itself and seeks its own preservation. A man may respect himself in a regular way, nothing wrong with that. That self which we must hate or deny is that self which stands in opposition to God, or, in a lesser extent, but still bad, sinful, a competition with him, and so jostleth with him for the throne. Lay aside God, and self steppeth in as the next heir. It is the great idol of the world ever since the fall, when men took the boldness to depose and lay God aside, as it were. Self succeeded in the throne. Fallen man, like Reuben, went up to his father's bed. Self intercepted all those respects and embraces which were due to God himself, and so man became both his own idol and idolater. It is with God and self as it was with Dagon and the ark. And looking into Dagon a little more, the idol, it's very appropriate to use that as an example here, because Dagon was like the overall idol of all time, because it was thought that part of that word represents grain, being a plowman. So it relates to the earth. He's also a fish god and related to cities in many ways. So Dagon in many respects represents a lot of idolatry and symbolically. So it is with God and self as it was with Dagon and the ark. They can never stand together in competition. Set up the ark, and Dagon, he was also, of course, the main idol of the Philistines, and Dagon must fall upon his face. Set up Dagon, and the ark is deposed and put down. Well then, if we would know when self is sinfully respected in a bad way, we must consider what are the rights and the undoubted flowers of the crown of heaven. I mean, what are those special privileges and respects that are so appropriated to the Godhead as that they cannot, without treason to the King, capital A, of all the earth, be alienated from him or communicated to any creature? So there are four. Number one, to be the first cause. Again, these are the rights and undoubted flowers of the crown of heaven. To be the first cause upon whom all things depend in their being and operation. Number two, to be the chiefest good, and therefore to be valued above all beings, interests, and commandments in the world. Three, to be the highest Lord, the most absolute sovereign, who swayeth all things by his laws and providence. And four, to be the last end, in which all things do at least terminate and center. So that covers all the main eternal aspects of the Lord and eternity. First, as God is the first cause, so he would keep up the respects of the world to his majesty by dependence and trust. Now, it is the ambition of man to affect an independency, to be a God to himself, sufficient for his own happiness. Our first parents, of course, greedily catched at that bait. Ye shall be as gods, Genesis 3, verse 5. The devil meant it not in a blessed conformity, but a cursed self-sufficiency. And we are all apt to be taken in the same snare, which certainly is a very grievous sin. Nothing can be more hateful to God. This, therefore, is a great part of self-denial, to work us off from other dependences and to trust in God alone. Secondly, as God is the chiefest good, so he must have the highest esteem. Valuing other things above God is the ground of all miscarriage in the business of religion. When anything is honored above God, or made equal with God, or indulged against the will of God, Dagon is set up and the ark is made to fall. Third, as God is the highest Lord and most absolute sovereign, it is his peculiar prerogative to give laws to the creature. Therefore, self is not to interpose and give laws to us, but only God. His will must stand. The great contest indeed between God and the creature is, whose will shall stand? God's will or ours? Who shall prescribe to us, self or God? Fleshly nature sets up laws against laws, and our fleshly wills set up providence against providence, try to install our own providences. Self-will is bewrayed by murmuring against God's providence, by rebellion against his laws, and when we are obstinate in our homage and obedience to self. Jeremiah 18:12, we will walk in the way of our own heart. And they said, there is no hope, but we will walk after our own devices, and we will, everyone, do the imagination of his evil heart. In Jeremiah 44, verse 17, whatsoever cometh out of our mouths, that we will do. But we will certainly do whatsoever thing goeth forth out of our own mouth, to burn incense unto the Queen of heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, as we have done, we and our fathers, our kings and our princes, in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. For then had we plenty of victuals, and were well, and saw no evil. So James 1 verse 14, the apostle makes it to be the root of all sin when a man is drawn away by his own lusts and his own will that is set up against the laws of God. James 1:14, but every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. So in providence, a stubborn creature will not submit when God's will is declared. It was a great submission and an act of self-denial in Christ when he said, not as I will, but as thou wilt. But self saith, not as thou wilt, but as I will. For we by murmuring set up an anti-providence against God. Fourthly, as God is the last end of our beings and actions, the supreme cause is to be the utmost end. Proverbs 16 verse 4, God made all things for himself. Pretty succinct. But now in all that we do, we look to ourselves. Vain man sets up self at the end of every action and jostles out God. In all the actions of life, for the vain human, they are but a kind of homage to the idol of self. If they eat and drink, it is to nourish self, a meat offering and a drink offering to appetite. If they pray or praise, it is to worship self, to advance the repute of self. The crown is taken off from God's head. He is not made the utmost end. If they give alms, they are a sacrifice offered to the idol of self-estimation. Quote, they give alms to be seen of men, saith Christ, and in this self is set up, and God is deposed and laid aside. Subpoint 2 of this first part, he says, let me give you some particular instances. To instance in excellences, moral and natural, or in civil interest. In moral excellences, righteousness, that is apt to be a snare in point of self-dependence. Paul found it to be a loss. Philippians 3, verse 7, a hindrance from casting ourselves entirely upon grace. But what things were gain to me, those I counted loss for Christ. Philippians 3, verse 7. It is the highest point of self-denial for a man to deny his own righteousness, to see the dung and dross that is in himself and all his moral, supposedly, excellences. So also concerning our own wisdom. That is a self that comes to be denied, needs to be. It is said to Babylon, Isaiah 47, thy understanding hath undone thee. I looked that up a little further because he didn't include the verse. Isaiah 47:10, for thou hast trusted in thy wickedness. Thou hast said, none seeth me. Thy wisdom and thy knowledge, it hath perverted thee. And thou hast said in thine heart, I am, and none else beside me. So of all men, when we presume upon our own sense and apprehension, we soon go wrong. This is the main thing to be considered here. For Peter, again, referred to earlier, out of carnal wisdom, dissuades Christ, and then Christ saith, whoever will come after me, let him deny himself, deny the dictates of his own reason and will. He that makes his own bosom his oracle asketh counsel of a fool. We shall be cavilling and disputing till we have disputed ourselves out of all religion. Job 6 verse 24. Cause me to understand wherein I have erred. That's a great prayer. Till we come to see by divine light. Carnal wisdom is always making lies and ill reports of religion. We think it folly and preciseness to be strict, and that zeal is fury, and it is cowardice and disgrace to put up wrong. We shall still be calling good evil and evil good, because we are wise in our own eyes. There is a woe pronounced upon such. In Isaiah 5, 21 and 22, woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight, etc. It is an excellent point of self-denial to, quote, become a fool that we may be wise, 1 Corinthians 3 verse 18. As when we look into a perspective glass, which was like an early telescope, close one eye, we wink with one eye that we may see the more clearly with the other. So here we must put out the eye of carnal wisdom and become fools, that we may be wise for Christ. So, for all civil interests, life, that is the most precious possession of the creature, and yet not too good to be denied. Verse 25 in 1 Corinthians, Christ instanceth, whosoever shall lose his life for my sake shall find it. That is the gospel way of thriving. Whosoever shall lose his life for my sake shall find it. That is the gospel way of thriving, to lose all for God. Now this is to be denied not only in purpose and vow, but when it comes your life, not only in purpose and vow, but when it comes to trial. As it is said of the saints in Revelations 12 verse 11, they loved not their lives to the death. When it comes to a point, either they must leave their God or lose their lives on the account of religion. The loving kindness of God is better than life. So for the estate, Matthew 19 verse 27, quote, we have left all and followed thee, say the disciples. And we must leave our coat, as Joseph did, that we may keep our conscience whole. The best usury in the world, 10 in the 100, would in the world be counted an oppression, but now here is 100 for 1. Mark 10 verse 32. And they were in the way going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus went before them. And they were amazed, and as they followed, they were afraid. And he took again the 12, and began to tell them what things should happen unto him. So also for fame and esteem in the world, though to an ingenuous spirit this is exceeding precious, yet John the Baptist, speaking of Christ, saith, he must increase, but I must decrease. We must be content to be ciphers. And this was really interesting and edifying to me. I looked up cipher, C-I-P-H-E-R. What he's talking about here is in arithmetic, an Arabian or Oriental character of this form 0, which standing by itself expresses nothing, but increases or diminishes the value of other figures according to its position. In whole numbers, when placed at the right hand of a figure, it increases its value tenfold. But in decimal fraction, placed at the left hand of a figure, it diminishes the value of that figure tenfold. So he's talking about the disciples decreasing. He's relating that to that verse. And I thought that was eye-opening to me. We must be content to be ciphers, that Christ may rise up into the greater sum. As one in a crowd that holds another upon his shoulders, he is lost in the throng, the one holding up, but the other is exposed to the view of all. So for our friends, Luke 14 verse 26, whosoever hates not his father and his mother, etc. There are many cases wherein we are to deny our friends, as suppose when we shall incur their displeasure out of a faithfulness to Christ. Carnal parents may frown upon us, and it may be withdraw maintenance and other conveniences of life, but it is an earthly father should frown, then a God should frown. It will be made up in spiritual relations. So in case of doing justice and right, we must not own father, mother, brothers, or sisters, for this is but more handsome and natural bribery. Levi was commended for this by the Lord in Deuteronomy 33, verse 9. He saith to his father and mother, I have not seen him, neither did he acknowledge his brethren, nor knew his own children, but observed my word, saith the Lord. Unquote. It is good to be blind and deaf to all relations in this case. Asa spared not his own mother, but deposed her, being idolatrous. In Deuteronomy 13, verses 6 through 9, if thy brother, the son of thy mother, or thy son, or thy daughter, or the wife of thy bosom, or thy friend, which is as thy own soul, entice thee secretly, saying, Let us go serve other gods, which thou hast not known, thou nor thy fathers, thou shalt not consent unto him, nor hearken unto him, neither shall thy eye pity him, neither shalt thou spare, neither shalt thou conceal him, but thou shalt surely kill him. Thy hand shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of all the people, etc. Again, Deuteronomy 13, verses 6 through 9. We are apt to look upon these rules as calculated for utopia, and have but a grammatical knowledge of them. Don't really take them that seriously. So also for carnal things. If it be a right hand or a right eye, it must be plucked out and cut off. Matthew 5. If it be as gainful and as profitable a sin as the right hand is profitable to us, yet it must not be spared. We must deny all ungodliness. Titus 2:12. Teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lusts, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world. We must deny all ungodliness, Titus 2:12, though ever so pleasing. Thus for the object, it extendeth to all things in the end. So I'll stop there, and he'll pick up the second half of the first point. And again, this reading is from Hoartius Bonar. He lived from 1809 to 1889. He was part of the Scottish Church. He knew Thomas Chalmers and McShane. I don't remember his first name, but pretty well known. Wrote many hymns and preached. And this writing is called Self-Denial Christianity. And again, it's convicting and encouraging. And you'll see why as I read. I know your works and your labor and your patience, and how you cannot bear those who are evil. And you have tried those who say they are apostles and are not, and have found them liars, and have borne and have patience, and for my name's sake have labored and have not fainted. Revelation 2, verses 2 and 3. Christ did not please himself, Romans 15:3. Yet if anyone were entitled to please himself, it was the Son of the Blessed, the Son of the Highest. He was no flesh pleaser, no man pleaser, no self pleaser. He pleased the Father. Quote, John 8:29. He was the highest type or specimen of that which was found so preeminently in Enoch, who was commended as one who pleased God. Hebrews 11:5. Paul did not please himself. I have made myself a servant to all. 1 Corinthians 9:19. I keep under my body. 1 Corinthians 9:27. In the Greek, that means I buffet or maltreat my body. There exists no picture of a self-denied man like that of 2 Corinthians 6:3 through 10. And he includes a little, I won't read the whole thing, but he includes a little snippet. Very familiar. In much endurance, in afflictions, in necessities, in distresses, in stripes, in imprisonment, in tumults, in labors, in watchings, which I looked into a little bit more. The one I looked at surmised that he was talking about having to, he and his people with him would have to stay awake at night at times to, keep watch for robbers and various evilness. It could be other things too, but that was part of it. In fastings, What minister of Christ, what Christian man or woman does not blush and hang the head as he reads these words? And Hoartius wrote this section, well, the whole thing, 150 years ago or so. What do we say to our self-indulgence, our sloth, our love of ease, our avoidance of hardship, our luxury, our pampering of the body, our costly feasts, our silken couches, our brilliant furniture, our gay clothing, our braided hair, our jeweled fingers, our idle mirth, our voluptuous music, our jovial tables loaded with every variety of wine and rich viands, foods? Are we Christians or are we worldlings? Where is the self-denial of primitive days? Where is the separation from a self-pleasing, luxurious world? Where is the cross, the true badge of discipleship, to be seen except in useless religious ornaments for the body, or worse than useless decorations for the sanctuary? Quote, woe to these who are at ease in Zion. Is not this the description of multitudes who name the name of Christ? They may not always be, quote, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry, but even where these are absent, there is high living, luxury of the table or the wardrobe in conformity to this present evil world. At ease in Zion, yes, there is the shrinking from hard service, from spending and being spent, from toil and burden bearing and conflict, which I wrote a little thing on a few thoughts of mine on that because he's going to touch on it a little bit more. From self-sacrifice and noble adventure for the master's sake, there is conformity to the world instead of conformity to Christ. There is a following afar off instead of a keeping pace with him whom we profess to follow. There is a laying down instead of a taking up of the cross, or there is a velvet lining of the cross, lest it should gall our shoulders as we carry it, or there is an adorning of the cross that it may suit the taste and the manners of our refined and intellectual age. Anything but the bare, rugged, and simple cross. We think that we can make the straight gate wider and the narrow way broader, so as to be able to walk more comfortably to the heavenly kingdom. We try to prove that modern enlightenment has so elevated the race, human race, that there is no longer the battle or the burden or the discipline needed, or has so refined the world and its pleasures that we may safely drink the poisoned cup and give up ourselves to the inebriation of the siren song, which was, I won't go into that. I looked into it, but anyway, at ease in Zion, even when the walls of the city are besieged and the citadel on the point of being stormed, instead of grasping our weapons, we lie down upon our couches. Instead of the armor, we put on the silken robe. We are cowards when we should be brave. We are faint-hearted when we should be bold as Elijah or as Paul. We are lukewarm when we should be fervent, cold when we should be full of zeal. We compromise and shuffle and apologize when we should lift up our voice like a trumpet. Before I forget it, as far as the conflict and the battle and the burden, my thoughts on this were part of the ease of the modern Christian professor is related to lack of entering into spiritual conflict and warfare. I've thought about that a lot. With most having no desire to enter that fray, although the Lord promises his true followers that they will indeed do battle spiritually in many aspects, but also against those who would propagate an amorphous, watered-down, easy-believism, world-friendly church. Having experienced both sides, I can testify from experience that the worldly professor has it much easier while they are still on this earth. When you dispense with any dealings concerning doctrinal truth, as an example, and actually caring about such things, you have no conflict in this area to deal with. It's easier on the flesh, so for the time being, you can put up your easy false Christianity feet and take false solace that all is well in your illusionary, peaceful, false modern churchianity. It's been my experience that the devil will point that out often, meaning the ease in that area so many people indulge in, and how foolish one is to put himself out and all that when it could be just as plush for you. Why bother? But of course, we can't nor shouldn't give in to that heart and mindset in which so many are ensnared. But the tempter will tempt. Okay, we compromise and shuffle and apologize, and we should lift up our voice like a trumpet. We pare down truth or palliate error, which is clothe, robe it, cover. When you're palliating it, you clothe it, robe it, cover it with excuse, conceal the enormity of offenses, extenuate, soften, and lessen it, or extenuate sin in order to placate the world or suit the spirit of the age or unify the church. At Ephesus, we find, and this is referring to Revelations 2, verses 2 and 3. At Ephesus, and this is the encouraging part to me, at Ephesus we find them from the first, a self-denying Christianity. And now, some 50 years after its foundation, we still find, even amid the decay of first love, the same self-denial and endurance of toil and suffering. It still bore noble testimony to a self-denying Lord and a self-sacrificing religion. It was still a noble and unworldly church, even amid much declension and coldness. What must have been its original nobility and self-crucifixion, when even in its declension and coldness it can be spoken of in the way here done by its gracious Lord. The angel of the Effusion church is sent to bear from Patmos the following message, partly of commendation and partly of rebuke. First the former and then the latter, to show the tenderness and patience of the Lord, who will not reprove us until he has said all he can in our favor. Is a great point. The speaker or writer takes to himself two special titles. One, he who holds the 7 stars in his right hand. 2, he who walks in the midst of the 7 golden candlesticks. The skies with all its stars is his. The earth also is his. All above and below is his. He walks among his churches, constantly moving to and fro with watchful love and care. For 18 centuries he has thus been walking and watching, trimming his lamps and supplying them with oil, sometimes also removing them out of their places. Thus this glorious one spoke to Ephesus. He speaks also to us. Number 1, I know your works. He knows what they are exactly. He knows their value precisely. He will never underestimate nor overestimate them. The cup of cold water shall be duly valued and rewarded. 2, I know your labor. Labor here is translated, denotes hard toil. Ephesus had had her days and nights of toil, and all this is acknowledged. She had not pleased herself. She had not lived in ease and luxury. She had set herself to self-denying work. Of what kind we know not. It is registered above, and we shall one day know it all. 3, I know your patience. The word means patient endurance of suffering or toil. The patience of Christ, the patience of men who knew that they were called to a self-denying life and following a self-denying Lord. Not impatience, nor fretfulness, nor anger, nor excitement, nor yet ease and comfort and luxury, but patience. Fret not yourself, Psalm 37:1, and the whole thing is, fret not thyself because of evildoers, neither be thou envious against the workers of iniquity. Fret not yourself is the church's watchword in evil days. It is to this that she is called, to calmness, forbearance, control of spirit, unruffled temper in the endurance of wrong, or the bearing of burdens and crosses. 4, I know how you cannot bear those who are evil. It is not compromise or tame submission to sin, and evil and error and apostasy that is commended here. It is a bold resistance to sin, bold rebuking of error, and departure from truth and holiness, and Christian consistency. For the Lord lays great stress upon the truth, and upon testimony for the truth, as well as upon a holy life. All true religion is founded upon truth, upon a true creed, a creed that rests upon God's testimony to his own truth. 5, I know you have tried those who say they are your apostles and are not. This church had been zealous for the truth, zealous against error, zealous against all false pretensions to apostleship. Error came in very early. Scarcely had Paul left Galatia when the whole church went astray into deadly error, receiving another gospel and other teachers, and drawing upon itself the sharpest rebukes the apostle ever gave. It was against the teachers of this false gospel that he said, let him be accursed. Such stress did he lay upon truth as the foundation of a church. In such abhorrence did he hold all departure from the truth. She must hold up that truth to the world. She must make known a true and full testimony. Otherwise, she becomes unfaithful to him, capital H, who is the true and faithful witness, to him of whom it is said, the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. To him who said, you are my witnesses. A true church will try all pretenders to apostleship, and try them by the unerring touchstone, the testimony which her head, capital H, has entrusted to her to maintain until he comes. 6, I know you have found them liars. They were discovered to be liars in 2 senses. Number 1, as respects their teaching, which was false. Number 2, as respects their pretensions to apostleship, which were found untrue. Liars is the fearful name which the Master gives to all such. In our day, departures from the faith are not accounted evil things, but as, quote, the excellent development of modern liberty and enlightenment. Heresy is becoming identical with liberal thought, which refuses to be bound by any restraints. Truth is made light of. The Church's testimony for God and for his truth is denied, and she is regarded as a mere literary institution for fostering speculation and free thought. Such she was not in the Father's purpose. She was to be the witness for God on earth, and if she failed in her testimony, she became useless and was to be branded as a liar, one of those of whom it was written that all liars have their portion in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone. And 3 more points here. Number 7, I know you have borne, B-O-R-N-E, and have patience, and for my name's sake have labored and have not fainted. This is so far a repetition of the previous commendation. Endurance, patience, unfainting, toil for Christ's name, these are the features of the Ephesian church. She was not what she once was, yet she still has a high place and a noble name for self-denial and self-sacrifice. She still bears her cross and follows her crucified master. She is not slothful, nor easy-minded, nor luxurious, nor self-pleasing. She is still an earnest laborer in the vineyard, bearing the burden and heat of the day. She had, amid much declension, upheld the truth which was given to her. She had proved herself a faithful witness or testifier. She had not let go of sound doctrine. For this the Lord still honors and blesses her. He is jealous of his truth, hates all departure from it. For what is truth? It is the embodiment of himself, whose name is the truth, and who is the witness for the truth sent by the Father. And he has 2 advisements here. Number 1, learn self-denying Christianity. Not the form or name, but the living thing. Christ did not please himself. Let us in this respect be his true followers, bearing burdens for him, doing work for him, submitting to the sorest toil for him, not grudging effort or cost or sacrifice or pain, spending and being spent for him, relinquishing the lazy, luxurious, self-pleasing, fashionable religion of the present day, around 1860. A self-indulgent religion has nothing in common with the cross of the Lord Jesus Christ, or with that cross of ours, which he has commanded us to take up and carry after him, renouncing ease and denying self. Our time, our gifts, our money, our strength are all to be laid upon the altar. We are to be living sacrifices, Romans 12:1. And 2, learn faithfulness to his truth. We hear it often said that what the age needs and what the church needs is religion, not theology. But the whole Bible takes for granted that there can be no true religion without a true theology. The Bible is God's testimony to himself and to his Son, the Christ of God. There can be no acceptable religion or worship or service except that which is founded upon that testimony. The belief of that testimony is life everlasting. The belief of any other testimony is death eternal. Let us be true witnesses for the truth. Let us shun and hate error, trying those that propagate it and finding them liars, as the Ephesian church did. Let the Master's word in reference to the errors of the early churches sound in our ears, quote, which thing I hate. And finally, a church may, no doubt, have a true testimony and yet be a very unfaithful church. She may have the form of sound words and the form of godliness, and yet be cold like Sardis or lukewarm like Laodicea. Yet, on the other hand, it is not possible that, with a false testimony or a testimony to what is untrue, she can represent her master and head at any time. A false testimony must make a false church. The belief of a lie will not save a man, nor will the belief of a lie win for a church the favor of the Lord. A true creed is of unspeakable importance, even though at times it has been associated with inconsistency and death. And so, all those are aspects of self-denial, and I pray that was edifying, and pray that we think about it and pray about it. Next week, Lord willing, we will continue with part 1, and he will look into how much, excuse me, gotta find regard of the subject or the persons who are to practice it. Will be part 2. So glad you can make it, and may God bless you in whatever way he may.
Amen. Thank the Lord. All right, everyone on the line. Yes, glad you could be here, and go in God's truth. And Lord willing, we will talk to you again soon.